The wind screamed like a dying god. It tore at Alara's ragged tunic. It bit into her exposed skin. But the cold was nothing compared to the fire burning in her back. She stumbled. Her bare feet sank into the deep drift. The snow turned red where she stepped. Run. The command echoed in her mind. It was the only thing keeping her awake. Behind her, the iron gates of the bone dungeon were fading into the blizzard. She had done the impossible. She had escaped. But freedom was not her goal. Not tonight. She clutched her hand to her chest. Her fingers were frozen stiff, wrapped around a jagged piece of rock, the ancient stone. It pulsed against her palm, a faint, rhythmic heat. It was the only proof. Alara gasped, choking on the icy air. Her lungs felt like they were filled with glass. She saw the lights ahead. Torches flickered in the white void. The war camp. The army of the north. She forced her legs to move. Every step was a battle. The wound across her back, a parting gift from the dungeon master's whip, screamed in protest. She could feel the warm, sticky slide of fresh blood running down her spine. She had to reach him. Kalen Blackfire, the warlord, the Alpha King, the man who would kill her without a second thought if she made a mistake. Alara pushed through the outer perimeter. The guards were blinded by the storm. They did not see the small, broken figure slipping between the supply wagons. Or perhaps they just did not care. Who would be foolish enough to invade the camp of the Blackfire Legion alone? Only someone with nothing left to lose. She saw the central tent. It was massive, made of black leather and bear furs. The banner of the obsidian dragon snapped violently in the wind above it. This was it. Her vision blurred. Gray spots danced in front of her eyes. She was losing too much blood. She had seconds left before her body shut down. Alara lunged forward. She did not stop to announce herself. She did not stop to think. She threw her weight against the heavy leather flaps of the entrance. The transition was instant. One moment, the deafening roar of the blizzard and the bite of ice. The next, silence and heat. Alara tumbled inside. She lost her footing on the thick rugs. She fell hard. The impact knocked the breath from her chest. She slid across the floor. Her momentum carried her forward until she crashed into something solid. A table. A massive, wooden strategy table. She groaned, trying to push herself up. Her hand, the one holding the stone, slammed onto the surface of the table to steady herself. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. Alara blinked, clearing the snow from her lashes. The air here smelled of wood smoke, roasted meat, and steel. She looked down. She was not leaning on wood. She was leaning on parchment. A map, a detailed, priceless map of the entire Northern Territory, and she was ruining it. Blood dripped from her nose. Blood smeared from her fingers. It pooled on the ink, turning the borderlines into a red mess. She froze. Slowly, Alara lifted her head. The tent was brightly lit by braziers of burning coal. Shadows danced on the walls. Standing around the table were 5 men. Generals. Each one was clad in heavy plate armor. They looked like statues of war. Their faces were twisted in shock and rage. The sound of steel singing against leather broke the silence. 5 swords were drawn in unison. The tips were leveled at her throat. Who goes there? One of the generals barked the question. His voice was rough, like grinding stones. Alara tried to speak. Her throat was too dry. All that came out was a raspy wheeze. She looked past the generals. At the head of the table, one man had not drawn his weapon. He did not need to. Kalen Blackfire sat on a throne of carved bone. He was enormous. Even sitting down, he loomed over the room. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the sun. He wore black armor that seemed to absorb the light. A fur cloak draped over one side, made from the pelt of a snow lion. His face was a landscape of harsh angles and brutal beauty. A scar ran down his left cheek, disappearing into his dark beard. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They were gold, burning, predatory gold. The eyes of an alpha who has never known defeat. He looked at her. He looked at the blood on his map. He did not yell. He did not blink. He stood up. The movement was fluid and terrifyingly fast for a man of his size. The other generals took a step back, giving him space. Kalen walked around the table. His boots made no sound on the rugs. He stopped inches from Alara, She could feel the heat radiating off him. It was overwhelming. The scent of him, pine, blood, and ozone filled her nose. It made her omega instincts tremble. It made her want to submit, to curl into a ball and hide. But she could not. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Kalen looked down at her. His expression was unreadable. He looked at the bloody handprint on his war map. "You have destroyed my strategy," he said. His voice was low, a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest. It was a voice made for commanding armies. Elara opened her mouth. "Please," she tried to say. No sound came. Kalen reached for his belt. He pulled a dagger. The blade was black obsidian, sharp enough to cut the air. "Give me one reason why I should not mount your head on a spike outside this tent," he said. He raised the dagger. Elara flinched. She tried to scramble back, but her legs refused to work. She slipped on the rug. Her arm shot out to catch her fall. Her sleeve, torn and soaked with snow, slid down. It exposed her wrist. The movement caught the light of the fire. Kalen froze. The dagger stopped mid-air. His golden eyes narrowed. He leaned closer. On the inside of Elara's wrist, the skin was branded. It was not a normal slave mark. It was intricate, a complex weave of ancient symbols burned into the flesh. The lines glowed with a faint, violet luminescence. The mark of the royal house. The silence in the tent shifted. It went from angry to confused. One of the generals gasped. "That mark," he whispered. "That is the high priest's seal." Kalen ignored him. His focus was entirely on Elara. He reached out. His hand was large, his fingers calloused and rough. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron, but he did not crush her. He held her arm up to the light. He inspected the brand. Then he looked at her face. Really looked at her. He saw the dirt, the bruises, the terror, but he also saw the defiance in her eyes. "You are an Omega," he stated. It was not a question. Elara nodded weakly. "And you bear the mark of the traitor priest," Kalen said. He released her wrist, but he did not step away. He towered over her, trapping her between his body and the table. "Why are you here, little mouse?" Kalen asked. His voice was softer now, but far more dangerous. "You ran through a storm that kills strong men. You bleed on my table. You wear a mark that should keep you chained in the capital. Speak." Elara swallowed the copper taste of fear. She could not waste this chance. She lifted her other hand, the one clutched tight against her chest. She opened her fingers. The ancient stone tumbled onto the map. It was a jagged shard of crystal, dark and unassuming. It clattered onto the parchment, landing right in the middle of the blood she had spilled. The generals looked at it with disdain. "A rock?" General Torian scoffed. He was a large man with a red beard. "She interrupts the war council to bring us a rock? Kill her, my king! She is a distraction." Kalen did not look at Torian. He looked at the stone. He saw what the others missed. The stone was drinking the blood. The red liquid on the map was being pulled toward the crystal. It soaked into the cracks of the rock, like water into a sponge. Elara knew what she had to do. The great priest had used this stone to send secret orders. She had watched him from the shadows. She knew the cost of its magic. It required a sacrifice. Essence. She needed to show them the truth. Words would not be enough. They would not believe a slave. They had to see. Elara grabbed the dagger from Kalen's hand. The move was so sudden, so unexpected, that he did not stop her. The generals shouted, "Treason! Assassin!" Elara did not attack Kalen. She slashed the blade across her own palm. Fresh, hot blood welled up. She slammed her bleeding hand onto the stone. The reaction was violent. A shockwave of energy blasted through the tent. The braziers flared, sending sparks flying. The heavy leather flaps of the tent blew open, letting in a gust of snow. The stone screamed, a high-pitched resonance that made the generals cover their ears. Then the light exploded. Beams of crimson light shot up from the stone. They pierced the smoky air of the tent. The light twisted and turned. It formed shapes, a projection. It hovered in the air above the table, terrifying and clear. It was a map, but not Kalen's map. It was the enemy's map. The projection showed the valley they were currently camped in. It showed the Blackfire army, and it showed the tunnels. Dozens of red lines snaked underneath the ground. Tunnels dug deep into the earth, bypassing Kaelin's defenses. And at the end of the tunnels, beneath the very spot where they stood, huge caches of explosives were marked. Wildfire kegs. The projection shifted. It showed a time. An hourglass running out. The sand was almost gone. The image flickered. A face appeared in the red light. It was the High Priest, the man who owned Elara, the man who was supposed to be Kaelin's ally. The projected face smiled a cruel, twisted smile. Midnight. The voice of the priest echoed from the stone. It was distorted, ghostly. At midnight, the Blackfire dogs will burn. We collapse the valley. No survivors. The projection vanished. The light died. The stone went cold. Darkness returned to the tent, save for the flickering coals. The silence now was absolute. It was the silence of men who realized they were standing on their own graves. General Torian's face was pale. "By the gods," he whispered, "they are underneath us." Another general checked his pocket watch. Midnight. That is in less than 1 hour. Panic began to rise in the room. The generals looked at each other, their discipline cracking. "Orders!" Torian yelled. "We need to evacuate. Sound the horn." Silence. The command cracked like a whip. Kaelin had not moved. He stood exactly where he was. His eyes were fixed on the map. On the spot where the red lines had been shown. He looked at Elara. She was trembling. The loss of blood from her hand, combined with the wound on her back, was too much. Her vision was tunneling. She swayed. She fell forward. She expected to hit the hard wood of the table again. She did not. She hit cold steel and warm fur. Kaelin had caught her, his arm wrapped around her waist, holding her up effortlessly. He pulled her against his chest plate. She could hear his heart beating. It was slow, steady. Even in the face of death, the Alpha King did not panic. He looked down at her. His golden eyes were no longer just predatory. They were intrigued, possessive. "You stole this," Kaelin said softly, "from the High Priest himself." Elara managed a weak nod. He betrayed you." Kaelin looked up at his generals. The panic in the room vanished instantly under his gaze. "Torian," Kaelin said. His voice was ice cold. "Take the 3rd Legion. Flush the tunnels. Do not let them light the fuse." "Yes, sire." Torian saluted and ran into the storm. "Varric," Kaelin continued, "secure the perimeter. If the priest has spies in this camp, I want them found. I want them flayed. At once, my king." The generals scrambled. They rushed out of the tent, shouting orders into the night. The camp came alive with the sound of steel and shouting. Kaelin did not move. He stood alone in the center of the war tent, holding the bleeding girl. Elara felt her consciousness slipping away. The pain was fading into a numb buzz. She tried to pull away from him. I have to go," she whispered. Kaelin tightened his grip. "No," he said. He lifted his hand and brushed a stray lock of wet hair from her forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but there was an underlying weight to it. "A claim. You saved my army, little mouse," Kaelin said. "You exposed the traitor." He shifted his grip, lifting her up into his arms completely. He carried her like she weighed nothing. He walked toward the back of the tent, toward his private furs. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you doing?" she gasped. Kaelin looked down at her. The firelight danced in his golden eyes. "You belong to the High Priest," he said. He paused. "Not anymore." He laid her down on the soft furs. He towered over her, blocking out the rest of the world. "By the laws of war," Kaelin whispered, leaning close to her ear. "Everything the enemy loses, I keep." He touched the glowing mark on her wrist. "He lost you. Now you are mine." Elara's vision went black. The last thing she heard was the roar of the wind outside and the deep, rumbling vow of the warlord. "Mine. Get out." The command was soft. It was barely a whisper, but it hit the room with the force of a war hammer. The generals froze. They looked from their king to the bleeding girl in his arms. They looked at the map, still stained with red, marking the tunnels that would have been their graves. General Torian hesitated. "Sire," he said, "the girl. She is an enemy asset. We need to interrogate her. We need chains. Kalen Blackfire did not look at Torian. He did not look at the map. His eyes were locked on Ilara's face. She was pale, deathly pale. Her breath came in shallow, ragged hitches. I said, "Get out." This time, the voice was a growl, deep, vibrating with the promise of violence. The air in the tent grew heavy. The shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching toward the king like loyal hounds. Torian swallowed hard. He bowed low. At once, my king. Boots stomped on the rugs. Armor clattered. In seconds, the war council was gone. The heavy leather flaps swung shut, sealing out the blizzard, the noise, and the army. Kalen was alone. He did not move immediately. He stood in the center of the vast space, holding Ilara against his chest. She was small, frail. Her bones felt light, like those of a bird, but she was heavy with secrets. Kalen carried her to the back of the tent. This was his sanctuary, a raised platform covered in furs. Wolf, bear, and shadow cat. He laid her down gently. The moment her back touched the furs, she whimpered. Kalen frowned. He remembered the blood on her spine. He reached for a dagger on his belt. With a swift, practiced motion, he sliced the back of her tunic. The fabric fell away. He sucked in a breath. Her back was a ruin. Fresh welts crisscrossed old scars. The flesh was raw, weeping blood where the dungeon master's whip had bitten deep. But that was not what drew his eye. It was the energy. A dark, sickly smoke was rising from her skin. It wasn't natural smoke. It was magical residue. It drifted upward, being pulled toward her throat. Kalen leaned closer. He turned her head to the side. There, hidden beneath the grime and the high collar of her rags, was a band of metal. It was iron, cold, and black. It was tight against her throat, choking her. Runes were etched into the surface, glowing with a pulsing toxic green light. A siphon collar. Kalen's jaw tightened. He knew these devices. The high priests used them to torture mages. They did not just block magic. They ate it. They fed on the wearer's life force, turning their own power into poison. Ilara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. "Please," she whispered. "The stone. Don't let them." "Shh," Kalen said. His voice was surprisingly calm. "The stone is safe. The army is safe." He brushed a thumb over her cheekbone, smearing a streak of dirt. "You, however, are dying." Ilara tried to sit up. Panic flared in her eyes. "I have to go. If I stay, he will find me." Kalen pushed her back down. His hand covered her entire shoulder. "Let him come," Kalen said darkly. "I will mount his head on my gate. But first, we deal with this." He tapped the iron collar with his fingernail. The metal hissed. Ilara flinched. "No, don't touch it. It kills anyone who touches it." "It is drinking you," Kalen said. "It is feeding on the magic you used to warn us. If I do not remove it, your heart will stop within the hour." Ilara's breathing hitched. "I know," she said softly. "That was the price." Kalen stared at her. She had run through a blizzard, bleeding and broken, knowing she was running toward her own death, just to save an army that would likely execute her. "Why?" he asked. Ilara looked up at him. Her eyes were silver, like the moon behind storm clouds. "Because I would rather die free in the snow than live another day in his cage." Something shifted in Kalen's chest. A dark, possessive heat coiled around his heart. "You are not going to die," he said. He stood up and walked to the nearest brazier. He did not call for a smith. He did not call for a healer. There was no time for tools, and no healer could touch a siphon collar without dying. Kalen Blackfire was not a normal man. He was a dragon blood. The fire in his veins was not a metaphor. He took off his gauntlets. He tossed them onto the table. He returned to the bed. He sat on the edge, his massive frame depressing the mattress. Ilara watched him with wide, fearful eyes. "What are you doing?" Kalen held up his right hand. He concentrated. The air around his fingers shimmered. Heat waves distorted the view. Slowly, his skin began to glow. First red, then orange, then a blinding white-hot gold. "I am going to burn it off," he said. Ilara shook her head, terrified. "You'll kill me. You'll burn my throat." "I have never missed a strike in my life," Kalen said. "Do not insult me with your fear." He moved his hand closer. The heat was intense. It felt like standing next to an open oven. Trust me, little mouse, or die. The choice is yours. Elara looked at the glowing hand. Then she looked at his face. It was harsh, brutal, and scarred. But his eyes were steady. There was no sadism there. Only absolute, unwavering confidence. She closed her eyes. She tilted her head back, exposing her throat. Do it. Kalen moved fast. He did not hesitate. He reached out with his burning hand. He did not touch her skin. He grabbed the iron collar directly. The sound was hideous, the screech of tortured metal and the hiss of steam. Elara screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pain. The collar fought back. The green runes flared violently, trying to repel the intruder. Magic lashed out, stinging Kalen's hand. He did not let go. He roared, a guttural sound that matched the fury of the storm outside. He poured more heat into his grip. His hand was a star, blazing with dragon fire. The smell of ozone and melting iron filled the tent. Hold still, Kalen barked. Elara was thrashing. Her body convulsed as the collar tried to drain the last of her life to defend itself. Kalen threw his other leg over her, pinning her to the bed with his weight. He trapped her flailing arms with his free hand. He was heavy, crushing, solid as a mountain. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. Sweat dripped from his brow. Look at me, he commanded. Elara's eyes flew open. Focus on me, Kalen growled. Not the pain, me. The iron turned red, then orange. The heat against Elara's neck was unbearable, but miraculously, it did not burn her skin. Kalen was controlling the thermal flow with impossible precision. He was absorbing the excess heat into his own flesh. She could see the pain in his eyes. He was hurting himself to save her. Why, she thought. Why would a king burn for a slave? The metal groaned. It began to warp. With a final, savage twist, Kalen ripped his hand back. Snap. The collar shattered. Molten droplets of iron flew sideways, sizzling into the fur rugs. Kalen tossed the broken remains across the room. They clattered into the corner, smoking. Kalen fell back, breathing hard. He looked at his hand. The palm was blistered, the skin angry and red. He ignored it. He looked at Elara. For a second, there was silence. Elara gasped, sucking in a huge lungful of air. She touched her throat. It was tender, but whole. Then, it happened. The dam broke. For years, the collar had been suppressing her magic, bottling it up, compressing it. Now, the lid was gone. Elara's eyes rolled back in her head. Her back arched off the bed. A shockwave of pure violet energy exploded from her body. It hit Kalen like a battering ram. He was thrown backward. He slammed into the heavy strategy table, splintering the wood. The tent groaned. The thick leather walls puffed out, straining against the ropes. The iron braziers tipped over, spilling coals across the floor. Outside, the wind stopped. The magic was so dense it pushed the blizzard away. Elara was floating. She hovered a few inches above the firs. Her hair whipped around her face like a halo of silver fire. Her skin glowed with arcane tattoos, markings that had been invisible until now. She wasn't just a mage, she was a source, a living well of power. The air inside the tent began to freeze. Frost raced across the floor, covering the spilled coals. Kalen pushed himself up from the wreckage of the table. He shook his head, clearing the ringing in his ears. He looked at her. Most men would have run. Most men would have drawn their swords to kill the monster before it destroyed them. Kalen Blackfire did not run. He stood up. He walked back toward the bed, fighting against the gale force winds of her magic. The pressure was immense. It tore at his clothes. It tried to push him to his knees. He grit his teeth and took another step. Elara, he shouted. She did not hear him. She was lost in the storm of her own power. She was destroying the tent. In a few seconds, she would level the entire camp. Kalen reached the bedside. The cold was biting, freezing his sweat. He didn't attack her. He didn't try to knock her unconscious. He climbed onto the bed. He grabbed her floating form and pulled her down. He wrapped his arms around her, engulfing her in his heat. He buried his face in her neck, right over the spot where the collar had been. He acted as a grounding rod. You are mine. he growled against her skin. "Your power is mine. Give it to me." He didn't steal it. He anchored it. His dragon blood was dense, earthy, and hot. It absorbed the wild, frantic electricity of her magic. The violet light flared once, blindingly bright. Then it collapsed. Elara fell limp. The levitation ended. They crashed back onto the furs together. The wind died. The frost stopped spreading. The silence returned. But this time, it was different. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannon fire stops. Kalen held her. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. Her skin was freezing cold, but she was alive. He shifted his weight, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. The tent was a wreck. Furniture was overturned. The expensive rugs were scorched and frozen. The map of the north was shredded, but Kalen didn't care about the map. He looked at the girl. She was unconscious. Her breathing was deep and steady now. The color was returning to her cheeks. The violet tattoos on her skin were fading, sinking back beneath the surface. Kalen looked at his own hand. The blisters from the iron were already healing. He looked back at Elara. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. The high priest thought she was a tool, a disposable spy. The high priest was a fool. She was a nuclear weapon, and she had walked right into Kalen's tent. The tent flap burst open. General Torian and a dozen guards rushed in, swords drawn. They looked wild, panicked. "King Kalen!" Torian shouted. "We heard an explosion. We saw the light. Are you attacked?" The guards scanned the room, looking for an assassin. They saw the wreckage. They saw the king on the bed, looming over the girl. Torian stepped forward, raising his blade toward Elara. "She is a witch. She tried to kill you. Halt!" Kalen didn't yell. He didn't even look up. He just spoke the word, and the soldiers froze. Kalen reached down and pulled a fur blanket up, covering Elara's body. He tucked it around her shoulders with a gentleness that was disturbing to witness. "She is not a witch," Kalen said softly. He turned his head to face his men. His golden eyes were glowing in the dim light. They looked like the eyes of a dragon waking up from a long sleep. "She is the queen of ruin." Torian lowered his sword, confused. "Sire, prepare the travel wagon," Kalen ordered. "The iron-reinforced one. Line the interior with velvet." "But the attack," Torian stammered. "The tunnels, the priest's army." "We are not retreating," Kalen said. He stood up from the bed, his presence filling the room. He walked over to where the broken pieces of the siphon collar lay. He crushed a piece of the iron under his boot, grinding it into dust. "The priest wanted to destroy us with fire and earth," Kalen said. "He wanted to play games with power." Kalen looked back at the sleeping girl. "We are going to the capital. We are going to march right to his doorstep." He looked at Torian. "And I am going to introduce him to the monster he created. But first, let her sleep." Kalen walked back to the bed. He sat down on the floor beside it, his back against the frame. He drew his greatsword and laid it across his knees. "Leave us," he commanded. Torian hesitated, looking at the devastation in the tent. "Sire, are you safe? She is dangerous." Kalen ran a hand over the flat of his blade. "Yes," he said, "she is very dangerous." He looked at Elara one last time. "That is exactly why I am keeping her. Now, get out." The soldiers retreated. The flap closed. Kalen Blackfire sat in the dark, listening to the girl breathe, watching the steam rise from his healing hand. The war had just changed, and for the first time in 10 years, the Alpha King felt a challenge worthy of his strength. He closed his eyes and waited for the dawn. The capital of the High Priest was a city of white stone and golden spires. It looked pure. It looked holy, but beneath the surface, it was rotting. Elara knew the rot well. She had lived in it. Now she was back. But she was not in chains. She was walking beside a monster. Kalen Blackfire moved through the shadows of the sewer tunnels like a panther. His heavy armor was gone. He wore dark leather and chainmail, silenced and deadly. The greatsword on his back was the only thing that gleamed in the gloom. Elara stopped. She held up a hand. Kalen froze instantly. He was large, but he knew how to be still. He loomed behind her, a wall of heat and muscle in the damp cold. "We are close," Elara whispered. "The air tasted of sulfur here. And something else, something sweet and metallic." Kalen sniffed the air. He grimaced. "Old blood," he rumbled. "And magic." Elara pointed to a section of the wall. It looked like solid brick. To anyone else, it was a dead end. But Elara saw the faint, violet shimmer of the ward. "It is a blood seal," she said. "Only those marked by the house can open it." Kalen stepped closer. He looked at the wall, then down at her. He took her hand. His grip was gentle but possessing. "Do it," he said. Elara hesitated. The memories of this place were like shards of glass in her mind. This was where they took the ones who misbehaved, the ones who never came back. She took a breath. She placed her palm against the cold, slimy brick. She pushed her magic into the stone. The wall hissed. The violet light flared, tracing the outline of a door. The bricks ground together, sliding backward and sideways. A gust of air hit them. It was hot. It smelled of forge fire and burning meat. Kalen stepped in front of her. He drew a long, serrated dagger. "Stay behind me." They walked into the belly of the beast. The room was cavernous. It was not a dungeon. It was a factory. Huge iron vats lined the walls, bubbling with a thick, glowing green liquid. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation onto the stone floor. In the center of the room, massive anvils sat silent and waiting. But there were no smiths. There were only bodies. Piles of them. They were stacked in the corners like firewood. Some were skeletons, some were fresh. All of them bore the mark of the slave. Elara covered her mouth to stifle a sob. She knew some of these faces. Kalen did not look away. He walked toward the nearest workbench. He moved with a cold, predatory focus. On the table lay a stack of swords. They were polished to a mirror sheen. They looked like the finest steel. They were stamped with the seal of the Blackfire Legion. Kalen picked one up. He tested the weight. "Too light," he muttered. He gripped the hilt with one hand and the blade with the other. He applied pressure. Snap! The sword shattered like glass. It did not bend. It broke. Kalen looked at the jagged metal in his hand. His face remained impassive, but his eyes began to burn with that terrifying golden light. "Iron painted with silver," he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. He picked up another weapon, a shield. He punched it. His fist went straight through the metal, crumpling it like paper. "My men died holding these," Kalen said. He turned to look at the bubbling vats. He walked over to one. He looked inside. The green liquid was swirling. Floating in the suspension were bones. Human bones. They were being dissolved. Kalen gripped the edge of the vat. The iron groaned under his fingers. "He is not just making cheap weapons," Kalen said. "He is harvesting souls." Elara walked up beside him. She forced herself to look. "The Soul Forge," she whispered. "I thought it was a myth. The older slaves told stories. They said Varric could extract the strength of a dying man and put it into steel. But he puts it into the weapons he sells to our enemies," Kalen realized. "He gives me brittle iron, and he sells enchanted steel to the southern kingdoms. He creates the war," Elara said, "and he profits from the death on both sides." Kalen threw the broken sword handle against the wall. It clattered loudly in the silence. "He is a merchant of death," Kalen growled, "and I have been his best customer." Elara saw something on a desk at the far end of the room. It was a large, leather-bound book. It was open. She ran toward it. Kalen followed, his eyes scanning the shadows for movement. Elara looked at the pages. Her eyes widened. "Kalen, look." He looked over her shoulder. The book was a ledger, but it did not list gold or grain. It listed names, thousands of names, and next to them, dates. Elara ran her finger down the list. "Here," she said. "Look at the date. Today." Kalen read the entry. Payment due, the Northern Legion. Price, 5,000 souls. Delivery method, the Great Collapse. Kalen went still. The air around him began to vibrate with heat. The Northern Legion. That was his personal vanguard, the men he had left behind to guard the valley. "They are the payment," Elara said, her voice trembling. Kalen grabbed the book. He flipped the page. There was a diagram. It showed the valley where his army was camped. It showed the tunnels they had seen on the map before. But the diagram showed something else. It showed a ritual circle, a massive one. encompassing the entire camp. He is not going to blow them up with powder, Kalen said. That was a lie. The explosives are just the trigger. He pointed to the symbols on the page. He is going to sacrifice them. All of them, at once. Elara read the ancient text beneath the diagram. To forge the crown of eternity, the text read, 5,000 warrior souls, consumed in fire, at the stroke of midnight. Kalen slammed the book shut. Immortality, he spat. The old bastard wants to live forever, and he is using my army as fuel. Elara looked around the horrific laboratory, the vats, the bones, the fake steel. It all made sense. Varric needed a massive amount of death energy to complete his ascension. A war was the perfect cover. Kalen, she said. The time. Kalen looked at a clock mechanism on the wall. It was a water clock, counting down. The water was almost gone. We have less than an hour, Kalen said. He turned to Elara. Can you stop it? Can you break the circle from here? Elara shook her head. No, the control is not here. This is just the factory. The ritual must be performed at the top of the tower, under the moon. Then we go up, Kalen said. He grabbed her hand again. He pulled her toward the exit, but the exit was no longer empty. A heavy grinding sound filled the room. The shadows at the far end of the laboratory began to move. A figure stepped into the light. It was enormous, taller even than Kalen. It wore plate armor, but the armor was fused directly into its flesh. Its helmet had no eye slits, just a smooth, blank surface of steel. In its hands, it held a massive warhammer. The head of the hammer glowed with the same sickly green light as the vats. A hollow knight, Elara gasped. She pulled back. They feel no pain. They have no souls. Kalen did not pull back. He let go of Elara's hand. He reached over his shoulder and drew his greatsword. The sound of the blade ringing against the sheath was sharp and clear. Stay back, Kalen ordered. The hollow knight charged. It moved with unnatural speed for its size. The ground shook with every step. It raised the hammer and brought it down. Kalen sidestepped. The movement was a blur. The hammer smashed into the stone floor where Kalen had been standing a second ago. Stone chips exploded outward. A crater formed in the solid rock. Kalen swung his sword. A heavy, two-handed strike aimed at the knight's waist. Clang. Sparks flew. The sword bit into the armor, but it did not cut through. The knight was reinforced with magic. The knight backhanded Kalen. Its gauntlet caught Kalen in the chest. Kalen slid backward, his boots carving grooves into the floor. He grunted, but he did not fall. He is strong, Kalen noted. He spat blood onto the floor. Good. I need to hit something. Kalen roared. He did not use finesse this time. He used pure, unadulterated violence. He charged the knight. He ducked under a swing of the hammer and slammed his shoulder into the creature's chest. The impact sounded like a cannon shot. The hollow knight stumbled back. Kalen didn't let up. He drove his knee into the creature's midsection, denting the armor. He grabbed the creature's helmet with his free hand. His hand began to glow, the white-hot dragon fire. Burn, Kalen snarled. He poured heat into the steel. The creature thrashed. It dropped the hammer. It clawed at Kalen's arm. Kalen's grip was absolute. He melted the helmet. The steel turned red, then orange. The creature's flailing slowed. Kalen released it and kicked it away. The hollow knight crashed into one of the acid vats. There was a splash, a hiss, and then the metal began to dissolve. Kalen stood panting, his chest heaving. Smoke rose from his hand. He turned to Elara. Are you hurt? He asked immediately. Elara shook her head. She was staring at him. He had just dismantled a monster with his bare hands. No, she said, but more will come. The noise. Let them come, Kalen said. He sheathed his sword. He walked over to her. He checked her over, his eyes scanning her face, her neck, her arms. He needed to be sure she was untouched. We have to move, Elara urged. Midnight is coming. Kalen nodded. He looked up at the ceiling. High above them, through layers of stone and earth, the high priest sat in his tower. He thinks he is a god, Kalen said softly. He reached out and brushed a smudge of soot from Elara's cheek. Tonight, Kalen promised, We show him what a devil looks like." He took her hand. "Lead the way, my queen." They ran. They left the horror of the soul forge behind. They climbed the spiral stairs that cut through the bedrock. The air grew thinner as they ascended. The smell of sulfur faded, replaced by the smell of incense and cold night air. They were entering the tower proper. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. Every step took them closer to the man who had owned her, the man who had branded her. She felt a wave of dizziness. The fear was a physical weight. She stumbled on a step. Kaelin's arm was around her waist instantly. He held her up. "I can't," she whispered. He will control me. The mark on my wrist. Even without the collar, he has words. Command words. Kaelin pulled her close. He pressed her back against the stone wall of the stairwell. He blocked her view of the stairs. He filled her vision. "Look at me," he commanded. Elara looked up into his golden eyes. "He does not own you," Kaelin said. "Not anymore." He lifted her hand. He kissed the inside of her wrist, right over the glowing brand. His lips were hot. The sensation sent a shock through her body. "This mark is ink," Kaelin said. "I am blood. Blood is stronger than ink." He leaned his forehead against hers. "If he tries to speak a command word, I will cut out his tongue. If he tries to look at you, I will pluck out his eyes. Do you understand?" Elara nodded. The panic receded, replaced by the warmth of his fury. He was a shield, a living, breathing wall of protection. "I understand," she whispered. "Good." Kaelin released her. He drew a second dagger and handed it to her. "If anyone gets close to you, kill them. Do not hesitate." "I won't," she said. She gripped the hilt. The leather was warm from his hand. They reached the top of the stairs. A heavy wooden door blocked their path. Beyond it, they could hear chanting, a low, rhythmic drone of 100 voices. The ritual had begun. Kaelin put his ear to the wood. "They are in the grand hall," he whispered, "directly above us." He looked at the door. It was reinforced with iron bands. "Stand back," Kaelin said. He didn't try the handle. He stepped back, lowered his shoulder, and launched himself at the timber. Crack. The wood splintered. The lock shattered. The door flew open. They burst into a hallway. It was lined with tapestries and gold candle holders. The opulence was blinding after the darkness of the tunnels. Guards turned at the sound. They were dressed in ceremonial white armor. "Intruders!" one shouted. Kaelin did not stop running. He was a freight train of black steel. He collided with the first guard. The man went flying. His chest plate caved in. Kaelin spun, his sword singing through the air. The second guard fell before he could even draw his weapon. Elara ran behind him. She saw a guard raising a crossbow. "Kaelin!" she screamed. Kaelin was engaged with 2 swordsmen. He couldn't turn in time. Elara didn't think. She reacted. She threw her hand out. She pulled at the magic in her blood. A bolt of violet energy shot from her palm. It hit the crossbowman in the chest. He was blasted backward, crashing through a tapestry. Kaelin finished his opponents. He turned to look at Elara. He saw the smoke rising from her hand. He grinned. A savage, blood-soaked grin. "That is my girl," he growled. They reached the double doors at the end of the hall. These were massive, 20 feet tall, carved with scenes of angels and demons. Beyond these doors was the open-air altar, the high priest, and the fate of 5,000 men. Kaelin stopped. He wiped the blood from his sword on a velvet curtain. "Are you ready?" he asked. Elara gripped her dagger. She felt the fear, but it was distant now. Beneath the fear was rage. Rage for the bones in the vat. Rage for the years she had lost. "Kick it down," she said. Kaelin laughed. It was a dark, joyful sound. With pleasure, he raised his boot and kicked the doors right in the center. The boom echoed like thunder. The doors swung open, banging against the stone walls. Wind and moonlight flooded the hallway. They stepped out onto the balcony of the high tower. The scene before them was a nightmare. The moon was full and huge. Beneath it, a massive circle of white chalk was drawn on the floor. At the points of the star stood 13 priests in red robes. They were chanting. In the center of the circle, suspended in the air by invisible chains, was a swirling vortex of images. Elara recognized the images. It was a live projection of the valley, of the Blackfire camp, the soldiers were sleeping, unaware that the ground beneath them was glowing red, and standing before the vortex, arms raised to the sky, was Varric, the high priest. He turned slowly. His face was gaunt, his eyes burning with madness. He did not look surprised. He looked amused. "Ah," Varric said. His voice was magnified by magic. It boomed across the rooftop. "The stray dog returns, and he brought my pet." Kalen stepped forward. The wind whipped his dark hair. He pointed his sword at the priest. "End the ritual, Varric, or I will end you." Varric smiled. He glanced at the moon. "You are too late, warlord. It is midnight." The clock tower in the city below began to toll. Bong. The sound vibrated in Alara's bones. Varric clenched his fist. In the projection, the ground in the valley cracked open. "No!" Kalen shouted. He surged forward. Varric snapped his fingers. A wall of force slammed into Kalen. It stopped him in his tracks. He pushed against it, his boots sliding on the stone, veins popping in his neck. Varric looked at Alara. "Come here, 734, he said softly. Alara felt the pull, the command buried in her mind. Her feet wanted to move. Her body wanted to obey. She grit her teeth. She remembered Kalen's kiss on her wrist. "I am blood. Blood is stronger than ink." "No," she said. Varric's eyebrows shot up. "No?" Alara raised her hand. Her violet magic flared, brighter than the moon. "My name is Alara," she screamed. She unleashed her power, not at Varric, but at the ritual circle itself. She didn't try to break the shield. She aimed for the chalk lines on the floor. Her magic tore through the stone. It erased the runes. It broke the perfect geometry of the spell. The vortex flickered. The image of the valley distorted. Varric screamed in fury. "You stupid girl! You have destabilized the flow." The energy in the circle turned chaotic. The red light turned jagged and wild. Kalen felt the barrier weaken. He roared and shattered it with his shoulder. He was free. He charged at Varric. Varric panicked. He drew a scepter of gold and iron. He pointed it at the vortex. "If I cannot have the souls," Varric shrieked, "then no one will." He fired a bolt of black energy into the unstable spell. The reaction was instantaneous. The vortex didn't collapse. It expanded. A shockwave of silent force blasted outward. It knocked the 13 priests off the tower. They fell screaming into the night. Alara was thrown backward. She hit the stone railing hard. Kalen dug his sword into the ground to anchor himself. The light grew blindingly bright. The air began to tear. A rift was opening, right there on the tower. A hole in the world. Kalen looked at Varric. The priest was laughing maniacally as he was pulled toward the rift. He looked at Alara. She was clinging to the railing, her fingers slipping. The gravity of the rift was intense. It was sucking everything in. Kalen had a choice. Strike the priest, or save the girl. It wasn't a choice at all. Kalen abandoned his attack. He turned and ran toward Alara. He grabbed her arm, just as her grip failed. He pulled her into his chest. He drove his sword deep into the stone floor, burying it to the hilt. He held onto the handle with one arm and held Alara with the other. They hung there, suspended in the gale of the opening void. Varric flew past them. The high priest clawed at the air, his laughter turning to screams as the rift swallowed him whole. The tower shook. The stone cracked. Kalen looked down at Alara. Her eyes were closed. She was limp. "Stay with me." He roared over the sound of the tearing sky. The rift pulsed one last time. Then, with a sound like a dying star, it imploded. Darkness took them. The dust from the tower collapse had settled, but the air still tasted of ash and ozone. The city was in chaos. Bells were ringing. Not the slow toll of the hour, but the frantic, clanging rhythm of alarm. Kalen Blackfire did not run. He walked. He moved through the debris of the lower palace courtyard. His black armor was scorched. His cloak was torn. Blood, dark and drying, coated one side of his face. But he did not limp. He marched with the terrifying, unstoppable cadence of a storm front. His hand was wrapped tightly around Alara's arm. She stumbled beside him. She was exhausted. The magic she had used at the tower had drained her to the marrow. Her legs felt like lead. Her vision swam with gray spots, but Kaelin did not let her fall. His grip was an iron shackle, holding her upright, pulling her forward. "Where are we going?" Elara rasped. Her throat was raw. Kaelin did not look at her. His golden eyes were fixed straight ahead. They burned with a cold, focused fury that was far scarier than his rage. "To the end," he said. They turned a corner. The narrow streets opened up. Ahead of them lay the muster field. It was a vast expanse of paved stone, large enough to hold 10,000 men, and today it was full. A sea of soldiers stood in formation: the Northern Legion, the Home Guard, the City Watch. Thousands of men in steel and leather, their breath misting in the cold night air. Torches flickered in the darkness, creating a restless ocean of firelight. At the far end of the field stood the Iron Dais. It was a massive platform of black metal raised high above the crowd. It was the place where kings declared war. It was the place where traitors were executed. And standing on the dais, bathed in the light of braziers, was High Priest Varric. He was alive. Elara gasped. "How?" "We saw him fall into the rift." "Rats always find a way to scurry out of the dark," Kaelin growled. Varric looked battered. His white robes were singed. He leaned heavily on his staff, but his voice was strong. It was magnified by magic, booming across the silent ranks of the army. "Soldiers of the realm!" Varric shouted. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "We have been betrayed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. 10,000 heads turned. They looked at their priest. They looked confused, terrified. "The king has fallen," Varric continued. He pointed a shaking finger toward the smoking ruins of the tower in the distance. "The warlord Kaelin Blackfire is no more. He has been consumed." "No," Elara whispered. "He is lying." Kaelin tightened his grip on her arm. "Quiet. Let him speak. Let him dig his own grave." Varric's voice rose to a fever pitch. He was a master of performance. He knew exactly which strings to pull. He was a great man, Varric cried, feigning grief. "The greatest of us." But his mind was weak. He allowed a shadow to enter his heart. A witch. The crowd shifted uneasily. The word witch was a curse, a death sentence. "She came to him in the guise of a slave," Varric shouted. "She poisoned his mind with lust. She twisted his thoughts with dark magic. She led him to the tower. She tried to sacrifice him to the void." The soldiers shouted in anger. They slammed their spears against their shields. The sound was deafening. Clang, clang, clang. Elara felt the fear ice her veins. "They hate me," she thought. "They will tear me apart." Varric raised his hands for silence. "I tried to save him. I fought the demon on the tower, but her darkness was too strong. She killed our king. Liar." The roar did not come from the crowd. It came from the back of the field. It was not magnified by magic. It did not need to be. It was the roar of a dragon. Kaelin Blackfire stepped into the light of the perimeter torches. Silence fell over the muster field. It was instant and absolute. Every head turned. 10,000 pairs of eyes widened in shock. The king walked down the central aisle. The soldiers parted before him, like water breaking around the bow of a ship. They scrambled back, tripping over each other to get out of his way. They saw the blood on his face. They saw the smoke rising from his armor, and they saw the girl. Kaelin dragged Elara behind him. He did not look left or right. He marched straight toward the Iron Dais. Varric froze. For a second, his mask slipped. Genuine terror flashed across his pale face. He gripped his staff until his knuckles turned white. "He is alive," a soldier whispered. "It's the king," another said. Varric recovered quickly. He pointed his staff at Kaelin. "A phantom," he shrieked. "A necromantic trick. The witch has animated his corpse. Do not let it approach. Kill the abomination." The royal guard leveled their halberds. They looked uncertain. They looked at Kaelin, then at Varric. "Stand down," Kaelin ordered. He did not shout. He simply spoke. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The guards hesitated. They lowered their weapons slightly. Instinct won over orders. "You do not point a spear at the Alpha." "Kill him," Varric screamed, his voice cracking. "I command you. He is a puppet." Kaelin reached the base of the Iron Dais. He let go of Elara's arm. "Climb," he said to her. Elara looked up. The stairs were steep. Varric stood at the top, surrounded by his elite mage guards. "They will kill me," she whispered. Kaelin looked at her. "No one dies today unless I say so. Climb." Elara swallowed hard. She grabbed the cold iron railing. She forced her legs to move 1 step, 2 steps. Kaelin followed her. His heavy boots rang against the metal stairs. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. They reached the top. The platform was wide. Varric stood on the far side, flanked by 4 mages in red robes. Kaelin and Elara stood on the edge, overlooking the sea of soldiers. Varric sneered. "So, the dog survives the fall, and he brings his leash holder." He gestured to the crowd below. "Look at him," Varric shouted to the army. "Look at his eyes. Do you see the gold? That is the sign of possession." "The girl controls him," the soldiers muttered. They saw Kaelin standing there, bloodied and battered. They saw the small, frail girl beside him. It seemed impossible that she could control a giant like him. But fear makes men believe foolish things. Kaelin ignored Varric. He walked to the center of the platform. He reached behind his back. He grabbed the hilt of his greatsword. He drew it. The sound of steel sliding against leather hissed through the air. But the sword was broken. The blade had been snapped in the fight at the Soul Forge. Only 2 feet of jagged steel remained attached to the hilt. The rest was gone. The crowd gasped. To see the king's weapon broken was a terrible omen. Kaelin held the broken sword up. He showed it to the moon. He showed it to his men. "This," Kaelin said, his voice deep and resonant. "This is what the high priest has given us." He threw the sword down. It clattered onto the iron floor of the dais. He turned to Varric. "You sold us lies, priest. You sold us armor that crumbles. You sold us steel that shatters. You sent my men to die in the mud with weapons made of glass." Varric laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "The steel broke because you are weak, warlord. You have lost the favor of the gods." Kaelin took a step toward Varric. "I do not need the favor of the gods," Kaelin said. He turned back to Elara. He pointed at the broken sword on the ground. "Fix it." Elara stared at him. "What? Fix it?" Kaelin repeated. "Show them." Elara looked at the shattered blade. It was thick, heavy steel. It was ruined. I don't have a forge," she stammered. "I don't have a hammer." "You don't need a hammer," Kaelin said softly. "You have the blood of the ancients. You have the rune fire." He stepped close to her. He blocked Varric from her view. He created a private world in the middle of the public stage. "Do not be afraid of them," Kaelin whispered. "Be afraid of disappointing me." The threat was there, but it was wrapped in something else. Confidence. He believed she could do it. He was betting his crown, his life, and his reputation on her. Elara looked down at the sword. She remembered the Soul Forge. She remembered the fake steel dissolving in the acid. She remembered the feeling of the true magic she had unleashed at the tower. She took a deep breath. The air was cold, but inside her chest a spark ignited. She knelt. The iron of the dais was freezing against her knees. She reached out and touched the broken blade. Her fingers trembled. She closed her eyes. She stopped listening to the wind. She stopped listening to Varric's screeching accusations. She listened to the metal. It was crying. The steel was in pain. It had been forged poorly, rushed, filled with impurities. It wanted to be whole. Elara opened her eyes. They were no longer silver. They were glowing with a soft, violet light. She began to speak. The words were not the common tongue. They were not the language of the priests. They were guttural, sharp sounds. The language of the deep earth. The language of creation. Varric heard the words. His eyes went wide. "Stop her!" he screamed. "She is casting a hex. Kill her!" The 4 mage guards raised their hands. Fireballs formed in their palms. Kaelin moved. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stepped between Elara and the mages. He crossed his arms over his chest. He stood like a wall. "Let them try," Kaelin growled. The mages hesitated. They were afraid to strike the king. In that moment of hesitation, Elara began to work. She pressed her hand flat against the broken blade. Reform. A pulse of energy shot through the metal. It started as a hum, a low vibration that rattled the teeth of everyone on the platform. Then came the light. It wasn't the sickly green of Varric's necromancy. It wasn't the red of destructive fire. It was blue. Deep, electric, royal blue. It was the color of a star burning in the void. The light poured from Ilara's hands. It flowed into the steel like liquid water. The crowd below gasped. 10,000 men leaned forward. The metal began to move. The jagged edge of the broken sword softened. It turned molten, but it did not drip. It defied gravity. The steel grew. It stretched. It pulled particles from the air, from the iron floor, from the very dust. Ilara's voice grew louder. Her chant became a song. She wasn't just fixing the sword. She was purifying it. She burned away the cheap alloy Varric had used. She purged the weakness. She replaced it with her own power. Blue flames licked up her arms. They danced in her hair. She looked terrifying. She looked divine. Varric watched in horror. He knew what this was. Rune forging, he whispered. The lost art. Impossible. He realized he was losing the crowd. The soldiers were mesmerized. They were witnessing a miracle. Varric made a decision. Desperation clawed at his mind. He raised his staff. The green gem at the tip glowed with a toxic intensity. Die, witch, he shrieked. He unleashed a bolt of green lightning. It aimed straight for Ilara's back. Kaelin saw it. He started to turn, but he didn't need to. Ilara did not stop chanting. She did not look up. She simply raised her left hand, palm open, while her right hand continued to shape the sword. A rune appeared in the air behind her, a complex, glowing symbol of blue light. The green lightning hit the rune. There was no explosion. There was no struggle. The rune simply ate the lightning. It absorbed Varric's magic instantly. The green energy turned blue, purified by the ancient symbol, and was fed back into Ilara. She used his own attack to fuel her forge. Varric stumbled back. His staff smoked. The backlash hit him, knocking the wind from his lungs. The crowd roared. They had never seen magic like this. Magic that didn't destroy, but converted. Ilara finished. She pulled her hand away from the sword. The blue fire faded to a soft, pulsing glow. The weapon was whole, but it was changed. It was longer. The steel was darker, folded 1,000 times. Runes were etched down the center of the blade, glowing with a faint blue heartbeat. Ilara stood up. She was swaying. She was drained. She looked at Kaelin. "It is done," she whispered. Kaelin looked at the sword. Then he looked at her. His expression was fierce, proud. He reached down and grasped the hilt. As his skin touched the handle, the blue runes flared bright. The sword recognized him. It bonded to him. Kaelin lifted the weapon. It was light, perfectly balanced. It hummed in his hand, hungry for battle. He turned to face the army. He held the glowing blue blade high above his head. "Look," Kaelin roared. "Look at the truth." The soldiers cheered. It started as a rumble and grew into a thunderclap. The king, the king, the king. Varric fell to his knees. His narrative was shattered. His authority was dissolved in the blue light of the rune blade. He looked around wildly. His mages were backing away, terrified of the weapon Kaelin held. "No," Varric whimpered. "This is a trick. It is an illusion." Kaelin lowered the sword. He pointed the tip at Varric's throat. The blue light illuminated the priest's sweating face. "Is this an illusion, priest?" Kaelin asked. "Do you want to test the edge?" Varric scrambled backward, crawling on his hands and knees like a crab. "You cannot kill me. I am the voice of the gods. To strike me is heresy." Kaelin took a step forward. The tip of the sword hovered inches from Varric's skin. "The gods are not here," Kaelin said coldly. "Only us." He glanced at Ilara. She stood beside him, her hands still smoking slightly from the heat of the forge. She looked small, but her shadow stretched long across the dais. "You called her a witch," Kaelin said to Varric. "You called her a demon." He looked at the crowd. "Who forged this blade?" Kaelin shouted to his men. "Who gave your king his weapon back?" "The girl!" a sergeant shouted from the front row. "The rune maker." Kaelin looked back at Varric. "She is not a witch," Kaelin declared. His voice was final. It allowed no argument. "She is the royal smith." She is the keeper of the old ways. He leaned in close to Varric. And she is under my protection. Touch her again, speak her name again, and I will not just kill you. I will erase you. Varric shook. He looked at the angry faces of the soldiers below. He looked at the glowing sword. He looked at the golden eyes of the warlord. He scrambled to his feet. You will regret this, Varric screamed. You have chosen darkness. The High Council will burn this city to the ground before they let a ruined slave live. He slammed the butt of his staff against the iron floor. Smoke exploded around him. A teleportation spell. Cheap, dirty magic, but effective. Kaelin swung the sword. The blue blade sliced through the smoke, cutting the air with a sound like tearing silk. But Varric was gone. The smoke cleared. The dais was empty, save for Kaelin and Alara. The king lowered his sword. He did not chase the smoke. He knew the war had just shifted. Varric had fled to the sanctum, to the inner circle. Kaelin turned to Alara. She was trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only exhaustion. Her knees buckled. Kaelin caught her. He held her against his chest plate. The cold metal was warming now, heated by his body. You did well, he murmured into her hair. Alara looked up at him. The crowd was still cheering. They were chanting Kaelin's name. They don't hate me? She asked weakly. Kaelin looked out at his army. They respect power, he said. And you just showed them more power than they have ever seen. He sheathed the new sword. It slid into the scabbard with a satisfying click. He lifted Alara up. He swung her into his arms, carrying her bridal style. The cheering grew louder. Rest now, little mouse, Kaelin said. He began to walk down the stairs of the iron days. Tomorrow we do not defend. Tomorrow we hunt. He carried her through the parting crowd. The soldiers banged their swords against their shields in rhythm. Clang, clang, clang. It was the heartbeat of the army, and now it beat for both of them. Alara closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a slave. She felt like something else, something dangerous. As consciousness slipped away, she heard Kaelin's heart beating steady and slow beneath her ear, and she heard his final whisper, "Let them send the council. Let them send the gods. I have the weapon." The smoke from Varric's teleportation spell swirled in the cold air. It smelled of sulfur and fear. The iron dais was empty. The high priest was gone. The soldiers on the muster field shifted uneasily. They looked at the empty space where their spiritual leader had stood. They looked at their king, holding a sword that glowed with blue fire. Silence stretched across the square. It was a fragile, dangerous silence. Kaelin Blackfire did not look worried. He did not run after the smoke. He stood still, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. He turned his head. He looked toward the massive, ornate doors of the inner sanctum at the far end of the plaza. Alara stood beside him. She was shaking. He escaped, she whispered. He will summon the guard. He will bring the whole city down on us. Kaelin looked down at her. His face was a mask of cold, brutal calm. He did not escape, Kaelin said. He sheathed the rune blade. The blue light vanished, plunging the platform back into the flickering orange of the torches. He walked to the edge of the dais. "Block the gates," Kaelin ordered. His voice rolled over the army like thunder. A ripple of confusion went through the ranks. General Torian stepped forward from the front line. "Sire, the priest," he vanished. "He is trying to reach the holy vaults," Kaelin said. "He needs more magic. He needs more souls." Kaelin pointed a gauntleted finger at the sanctum doors. "He will find them barred." Torian hesitated for only a second. Then he slammed his fist to his chest. "First Legion," Torian roared. "Secure the sanctum. Wall formation." The army moved. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. 10,000 men turned as one. Shields locked together. Spears lowered. A wall of steel and muscle surged toward the palace doors, cutting off all escape routes. Kaelin turned back to Alara. "Come," he said. He did not carry her this time. He held out his hand. Alara looked at the leather glove. It was stained with soot and old blood. It was the hand of a killer. It was the hand that had saved her life a dozen times tonight. She took it. Kaelin led her down the stairs of the iron dais. They walked through the parted sea of soldiers. The men did not cheer now. They watched. They were witnessing a war between their king and their god. They needed to see who bled. They reached the sanctum doors. The soldiers of the First Legion parted to let Kaelin through. There, huddled against the gold-plated wood, was Varric. The teleportation spell had been short range, a desperate burst to reach safety. But the doors were locked. The magic of the palace had turned against him. Varric pounded on the wood with his fists. "Open," he screamed. "I command you. I am the voice." He turned as he heard the heavy footsteps approaching. He saw Kaelin. Varric pressed his back against the door. He slid down until he was sitting in the snow. His white robes were muddied. His staff lay on the ground, its green gem cracked and dull. "Stay back," Varric shrieked. Kaelin stopped 5 paces away. He loomed over the priest like a mountain. Snow began to fall again, large, soft flakes that drifted down from the black sky. They landed on Varric's face, melting on his sweating skin. "You have nowhere left to run," Kaelin said. Varric looked at the army surrounding him. Thousands of eyes. None of them held pity. "You cannot kill me," Varric stammered. "I am the cornerstone of the Empire. If I die, the wards fall. The monsters will come." Kaelin laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "The monsters are already here, Varric. I am looking at one." Kaelin reached over his shoulder. He did not draw the blue rune blade. He reached for a heavy iron axe strapped to his back. A simple weapon. A headsman's tool. Varric's eyes widened. He scrambled to his knees. He looked at Alara. "Girl," he pleaded. Tell him I am necessary. You know the laws. You know the cost." Alara looked at the man who had owned her for 5 years. She looked at the man who had put a collar on her neck and called it mercy. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was nothing. He was just a man. A small, pathetic old man, shivering in the snow. She looked at Kaelin. "Do it," she said. Varric screamed. "No! I demand a trial. I demand the council." Kaelin stepped forward. "Here is your trial," Kaelin growled. He kicked Varric in the chest. The priest sprawled backward into the snow. Kaelin planted a heavy boot on Varric's chest, pinning him to the frozen ground. "Your crime is treason," Kaelin stated. "Not against the crown, but against your own people. You sold their souls for power." "I did it for the Empire," Varric gargled, blood bubbling on his lips, "to make us strong." "You made us weak," Kaelin corrected. He raised the axe. The iron blade caught the torchlight. It looked dull and hungry. "Any last words, priest?" Varric stared up at the axe. He stared at the golden eyes of the warlord. "Curse you," Varric hissed. "Curse you and your whore. The void will take you both." Kaelin's expression did not change. "The void can try." He brought the axe down. There was a wet, heavy thud. Varric went silent. The head rolled into the snow. A dark pool of blood expanded rapidly, turning the pristine white ground into a deep crimson. Steam rose from the corpse. Kaelin stood there for a moment, the axe resting by his side. He breathed in the cold air. The smell of ozone and rot was gone. It was done. The silence on the muster field was absolute. 10,000 men held their breath. They had just watched their king kill the high priest. By the old laws, the sky should have turned black. Lightning should have struck the assassin, but the sky remained quiet. The snow continued to fall, gentle and indifferent. Kaelin wiped the axe blade on Varric's white robe. He sheathed the weapon. He turned to face his army. He did not look like a sinner. He looked like a force of nature. He walked back to Alara. She was staring at the body. "Are you afraid?" Kaelin asked softly. Alara looked up at him. "No," she said. "Good." Kaelin took her hand again. He pulled her toward the center of the plaza. He stopped where everyone could see them. He let go of her hand. He reached down and picked up Varric's staff, the gold and iron symbol of the high office. The crowd murmured. Was the king claiming the priesthood? Kaelin held the staff in one hand. He held his rune blade in the other. He looked at the soldiers. "For 100 years," Kaelin shouted, his voice carrying to the back rows, "you have been told that magic is a sin." He held up the staff. "You were told that only the priests could hold power, that anyone else born with the gift must be chained, collared, enslaved." He threw the staff onto the cobblestones. It clattered loudly. They lied to you. He pointed the blue sword at Alara. The soldiers flinched. They thought he was accusing her. Look at her. Kaelin roared. Alara stood tall. The wind whipped her ragged tunic around her legs. Her hair was a tangled mess of silver. She looked wild. You call her a slave, Kaelin said. You call her an omega. He stepped closer to her. He towered over her, but he did not diminish her. He framed her. She forged this blade when your forge masters failed, Kaelin said. She saved the Northern Legion when your priest sold them for parts. He looked at General Torian. Who saved you, Torian? The priest in his tower, or the girl in the snow? Torian swallowed hard. He looked at Alara. He remembered the projection in the tent. He remembered the warning. The girl, Torian said hoarsely. Louder, Kaelin barked. The girl, Torian shouted. Kaelin nodded. He turned back to the ranks. The collar is broken, Kaelin declared. The laws of the high priest are dead. He reached out and touched Alara's shoulder. His hand was heavy, grounding. From this night forward, there are no slaves in my kingdom. There are only those who fight, and those who fall. He looked down at Alara. His golden eyes burned with an intensity that made her knees weak. You are not a slave, Alara. He reached into his belt pouch. He pulled out a ring. It was heavy, black iron, set with a jagged piece of obsidian, the signet of the warlord. Give me your hand. Alara hesitated. This ring was the symbol of his authority. To wear it was to speak with the king's voice. She held out her trembling hand. Kaelin slid the ring onto her finger. It was too big, but as it passed her knuckle, it shrank. The magic of the ring resized it to fit her perfectly. You are the blood of the Empire, Kaelin said. The army gasped. Blood of the Empire. It was a title that had not been used in centuries. It meant equal. It meant partner. Kaelin was not done. He took a step back. He looked at her. He looked at the woman who had run through a blizzard for him, the woman who had burned her hands to fix his sword, the woman who had faced a god and won. Slowly, deliberately, Kaelin Blackfire lowered himself. The armor crunched. The heavy plates shifted. One knee hit the snowy cobblestones. The sound echoed across the square. A shockwave of disbelief went through the army. Soldiers dropped their spears. Some stumbled back. The Alpha King was kneeling. The warlord who had never bowed to any man, any god, or any king was on his knees in the snow. Alara stopped breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Kaelin, she whispered. What are you doing? Stand up. Kaelin looked up at her. His face was fierce, proud. I serve strength, he said, and I have never met strength like yours. He reached out and picked up Varric's staff from the ground. He held it out to her, handle first. Take it, he commanded. Alara looked at the staff. It was the symbol of her oppression. No, Kaelin said, not that way. He poured his own magic into the staff. His heat flowed into the wood. The green gem at the tip cracked and fell out. The gold turned black. It is just wood and iron now, Kaelin said. Make it yours. Alara reached out. She wrapped her fingers around the staff. As soon as she touched it, her magic reacted. Violet light exploded from her hand. It raced up the shaft of the weapon. The black wood began to glow. New runes carved themselves into the surface, purple, bright, and humming with power. The staff transformed. It wasn't a priest's scepter anymore. It was a war staff, a conduit for the Queen of Ruin. Alara felt the power rush into her. It wasn't painful. It felt like coming home. She tightened her grip. She slammed the butt of the staff against the stone. Boom! A shockwave of violet light rippled out across the muster field. It passed through the soldiers. It didn't hurt them. It warmed them. It chased away the winter chill. Kaelin smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. He stayed on one knee. He looked at his army. Behold, Kaelin roared. Behold the true power of the North. General Torian fell to his knees. One by one, the soldiers followed. The First Legion, the City Watch, the Royal Guard. Like a wave crashing on the shore, 10,000 men dropped to the snow. They bowed their heads. Not to Kaelin, to her. Alara stood alone on the plaza. surrounded by a sea of bowed steel. The wind picked up. It caught her hair, whipping it around her face like a silver halo. Her eyes glowed with pure, unadulterated violet fire. She looked down at Kalen. He was still kneeling at her feet, looking up at her with pure devotion in his predator eyes. He was her sword, her shield, her monster. And she was his queen. "Rise," she whispered. Kalen stood up. He drew his blue rune blade. He stood at her right hand, facing the army, facing the world. He raised his sword. She raised her staff. Blue and violet light crossed, piercing the dark sky. The army roared. It was a sound that shook the foundations of the city, a sound of victory, a sound of a new age. Long live the king! Long live the blood! Kalen leaned close to her ear. His voice was a deep rumble beneath the cheering. "The world is ours, little mouse." Alara looked at the horizon. The sun was just beginning to crest over the mountains. The long night was over. She tightened her grip on the staff. She felt the heavy iron ring on her finger. She wasn't a mouse anymore. She was the dragon's heart, and she was ready to burn the world down if anyone tried to take this freedom from her. Alara smiled. Let them come, she thought. The roar of the army swallowed the silence, and the warlord and his rune slave stood united against the dawn.